Hello everyone, my name is Zachary O'Shea, and this is Box of Teeth. Every October for the last few years, I've shared a homebrewed D&D monster every day, and I'm continuing it this year. So today is your October Monster Day for October 13th, 2023, Friday the 13th. For week 2 this year, what I've been doing is sharing legendary versions of previous Waning Court monsters that I have published. And the reason for this is twofold. One, I get to share 2 monsters with you every day, which I think is pretty cool. And 2, it gives fledgling dungeon masters or storytellers, keepers, whatever you want to call yourself, an idea of what it's like to take an existing monster, give it a name, give it a unique personality and a few cool extra abilities, and have a memorable antagonist that will stick in your players' minds. Today we're going to be going over the Lesionnaires, as well as a very specific and well-hated Legionnaire. Now I just want to remind you that the Waning Court is a group of Dark Fae that I use for a homebrewed Dungeons & Dragons horror campaign that have a folk horror, body horror, and cosmic horror feel. These creatures really focus on the first 2. So let's go ahead and cover the Legionnaire first. And I'm not mispronouncing it. It's supposed to sound like Legionnaire, but it is Lesionnaire. So short and sickly, a Legionnaire wears armor encrusted with dried discharge from a myriad of festering wounds, which stray direflies feast on. The Fae carries a rectangular shield emblazoned with the crest of the fallow field, a human skull splitting open like an overripe pumpkin. Greasy yellow hair spills over its angular face and pointed ears, its pale skin dotted with feverish flush and a sheen of cold sweat. The black-toothed soldier comes armed with a grimace and a grime-caked short sword. If its blade doesn't slay its target, then perhaps the sepsis will. Legionnaires are pretty gross. They are a low-level creature, and we'll go over that here in a moment. But as some background, in the Waning Court setting, they are all bound to Lord Fallowfield's, the Duke of Autumn's End, who is a bastard child of one of the actual Waning princesses, along with a missing infernal entity. So he is grotesque and ugly, hated by his court, tossed out by his mother, and carved out his own dark fiefdom in the Feywild. When Lord Fallowfield took over this area, sickness and a horrible disease called harvest rot, which I'll also cover here in a moment, swept through and changed all of the soldiers that he was now in command over. They tend to be a rebellious lot. They don't like him. They're neutral evil. The Autumn Fae are lawful evil, so there's some conflict there. They hate their wretched and warped states, and they're always looking for ways to subvert orders, or perhaps one day overthrow Lord Fallowfield's. So first, let me kind of talk about harvest rot itself, this disease that is associated with Legionnaires, and the legendary version we'll go over in a moment. Harvest rot itself is an infectious magical disease carried by the Legionnaires' weapons, and it is a plague that has buboes, much like the Black Plague did, except those swellings look more like gourds and pumpkins, so they're naughty and orange and seeping and gross looking. Whenever someone takes damage while they're infected with it, there's a chance that these cysts will rupture and do additional necrotic damage, and eventually a creature will die either from the extra damage or from the disease itself. And if they do, they rise up as a drifter, which is basically a plague zombie that is blown up with gas and kind of drifts around slowly, exploding and spreading more harvest rot. So pretty nasty, very nice and body horror-like. So let's take a look at the actual Legionnaire for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition right here. As you can see, they are a CR2 creature. They are Fae, they have leather armor, they have damage meaning necrotic damage because they're already diseased. They have cloying seepage, so they have a lot of wounds. It smells sickly sweet and has a chance to make people poisoned. Not a great thing to really smell. They have the harvest rot disease that they can give to people, and they can form shield walls when they're next to each other. They carry the septic short sword, which is the primary way that they give people harvest rot. They have a breath of frailty that they can use, which is you have to make a constitution save or you have disadvantage on strength-based actions, but it can't affect creatures that are not poisoned. They're nasty in numbers. They're would be really hard to deal with for a low-level party, but as your party progresses in level, they're kind of a mook that they can mow through as needed. They just had to be careful not to contract harvest rot. So let's go ahead and talk about the legendary version, who they actually hate as much as your players will, and that's Putrid Pete. Why do other Legionnaires hate Putrid Pete so much? It's pretty simple. He fully supports Duke Fallowfields and is a violent commissar among the Legionnaire ranks. He's caved in many a Fey fodder's head for cowardice or for speaking out against the Lord of Autumn's End. His frequent fratricide grants him the favor of this bastard noble, and he was gifted a oversized morning star named Gangrene, which is a perpetually rotty Manicore's tail. It carries a very potent version of Harvest Rot, and he will use it on just about anyone if they get in his way. Over time, his power and influence has grown, and lesser Fey soldiers follow his orders to the letter without open complaint. They don't want to be made an example of to motivate others, which is a pretty explosive example we'll cover in a moment. Putrid Pete, like all Legionnaires, wears ill-kept leathers into battle, soiled by a seeping wound. It's really only the mace Gangrene that makes him different visually from other of his kin. Let's take a look at his statistics for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. As you can see, he is a challenge rating 4, so much tougher than a normal Legionnaire. He does have Cloying Seepage, he does have Shield Wall, he does have multi-attack, he has Gangrene, which can hit pretty hard, and it also can give Harvest Rot, but if a creature already has Harvest Rot, it deals additional necrotic damage. He has Putrid Bolt, so he has the ability to actually do necrotic damage at range. He does have the Breath of Frailty that the other Legionnaires have. Now, he is a legendary creature, so he does have some legendary actions. One is, of course, attack, which is pretty standard for legendary creatures. One is martial, so you can order a Legionnaire to move. It does so without provoking opportunity attacks. And the last is for the Duke's Glory, where he selects a Legionnaire that he can see within 60 feet. That Legionnaire explodes, dealing damage to everyone around it, and makes all of the Legionnaires that can see that explosion immune to fear until the end of their next turn. That's what I mean by an explosive example. All right, we only have one legendary monster to go before week 2 is over, and I've really enjoyed sharing all of these creatures with you. Next week, we're going to move into various Fey Knights, and the week after that into Universal Antagonists, which won't be Waning Court themed anymore, but will still kind of fit with the horror subgenres we've been talking about. All right, everyone, I really do appreciate your time and your attention. I want to take a look at the other creatures I've made for every October, or hundreds of other horror-themed monsters for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You can always go to boxofteeth.blogspot.com, and they're all perfectly free there. Or if you're interested in the other horror role-playing game projects I have that have nothing to do with Dungeons & Dragons, or the horror fiction I write, including Grease Paint right there. It has a killer clown. It's a good read for the Halloween season. You can always go to www.zachariochet.com. All right, everybody, have a great Friday the 13th.